So, what if I told you that eating a standard piece of white bread actually spikes your blood sugar, like significantly faster than eating a literal spoonful of pure table sugar?
I mean, it sounds completely backwards, doesn't it?
And it really does.
We're just, we're so conditioned to fear the sugar bowl, but we completely ignore the bread basket sitting right there on the table.
Right. You're probably listening right now thinking, it's like, that's impossible. Bread isn't even sweet.
Exactly.
But today, we are looking at data that proves the everyday starches hiding in our pantries are actually a much bigger biological threat than the candy aisle.
Yeah, without a doubt.
We're jumping into this incredibly revealing article from the My-Nutri-Diary app. It's this platform designed to act as a coach for healthy aging. And the source we're exploring today is from their course material, aptly titled Carbs, the Good and the Ugly.
And, this data is just so vital because the mainstream conversation around carbs is, well, it's usually stuck at this really unhelpful binary.
Oh, totally. It's either carbs are great energy or carbs make you gain weight.
Right. And that doesn't actually help anyone make better choices when they're at the grocery store. What we really need to look at is the microscopic biology.
The actual mechanics of it.
Exactly. We need to understand how the mechanical processing of our food dictates our internal insulin response and, how that invisible mechanism correlates to long-term chronic disease.
Yeah, so to figure out how something as foundational as bread became the villain here, we actually have to step back, right? We need to look at what a carbohydrate is in its purest form.
We do.
Because when a carb enters your body, it doesn't all just get treated the exact same way, does it?
Not at all. The data outlines 3 distinct functional categories of carbohydrates, and this is based entirely on how human biology actually interacts with them.
Okay, so what's the first one?
So the first category is non-digestible carbohydrates. Think of dietary roughage.
Like celery strings and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh.
The fibrous structures in leaves, stems, certain vegetable skins. It's
Okay.
water-insoluble fiber. Okay. Your digestive enzymes literally can't break it down, so it just simply passes through your system.
Mhm.
It essentially acts as a broom for your digestive tract.
A prune. I like that. Okay, so that's the roughage. What is the second group?
That's where it gets a bit more semiotic. The second group is fermentable carbohydrates or water-soluble fibers.
And we can't digest those either, right?
Right. The human still cannot digest these. But the trillions of bacteria living in your gut microbiome,
Yeah.
they absolutely thrive on them. When these fibers reach your colon, your gut bacteria ferment them.
Okay, wait, so what's the benefit of that fermentation? Like, why do we care if our gut bacteria get a nice meal?
Because it's a metabolic trade. In exchange for you feeding them those soluble fibers, the bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and these biological compounds actively reduce inflammation, they maintain the integrity of your gut lining, and they even send signals to your brain that help regulate your metabolism.
That is wild.
You are essentially farming your microbiome.
I love that phrase. Farming your own gut. Okay, so we've got the broom and we've got the bacteria food. What is the third category?
Digestible carbohydrates. These are the sugars and the starches.
The ones we actually use for fuel.
Precisely. This is the category that the human digestive system is actively built to break down, absorb directly through the intestinal wall, and convert into glucose for immediate cellular energy.
Now, when we talk about that third group, the starches, especially the ones we find in natural grains and seeds, I like to think of them as like a locked safe of energy.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Because nature packed all this incredible dense fuel inside the grain, but in its raw natural state, the safe is locked tight.
Right.
Like if I just go out into a field, grab a handful of raw wheat and chew on it, my body doesn't really have the biological combination to easily crack it open and get the energy out.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it, honestly. Raw, intact grains are remarkably difficult for the human digestive tract to process. And what's fascinating here is that this locked safe is the exact reason early human civilization developed what we now call traditional processing.
They needed to get inside the safe.
Exactly. They had to invent physical keys to get to those calories. They realized that if they applied heavy mechanical force, like grinding grains between stones to make flour, and then added heat and water by boiling it, they could physically fracture the cellular walls of the starch.
So they essentially smashed the safe open.
Yes, they made that dense energy biologically accessible, but they didn't stop at physical force.
What else did they do?
Well, the true stroke of genius in traditional processing was harnessing biology through fermentation.
Oh, like sourdough.
Exactly. Early bakers figured out that if they added naturally occurring microorganisms like wild yeast to that flour and water mixture, it triggered this amazing transformative reaction.
The yeast basically eats the starches.
Spot on. And in doing so, it produces carbon dioxide gas. That gas gets trapped in the dense dough, expanding it and giving it that airy, fluffy texture we associate with a great loaf of bread.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if human ingenuity spent thousands of years developing these traditional methods, milling, baking, fermenting, to make carbs digestible without stripping away their nutrients, when did this go wrong? Like, if processing was originally a life-sustaining innovation, how did we get to a point where processed carbs are now public enemy number one?
The turning point was the Industrial Revolution. We fundamentally shifted the goal of processing food.
How so?
For millennia, traditional baking was focused on making food nutritious and digestible for the local village. But industrial refining, it is primarily focused on logistics. It's obsessed with shelf life, transportability, and, mass scale.
So it stopped being about feeding people and started being about storing products.
Exactly. And to understand the biological consequence of that shift, you really have to look at the anatomy of a whole grain.
Okay, walk me through it.
A grain has a protective outer bran layer, which is entirely made of that vital plant fiber we talked about earlier. Now, that fibrous layer is packed with essential vitamins, minerals, and importantly, natural healthy fats.
All right, the good stuff.
Yeah, those fats are fantastic for you and your microbiome, but they have a fatal flaw when it comes to industrial mass production.
Let me guess. Fat goes rancid.
It spoils very quickly. If you grind a whole grain into flour with the fatty fiber still intact, it will go bad in a matter of weeks, especially if it's just sitting at room temperature.
Wait, so I'm completely clear on this.
Yeah.
The food industry intentionally strips away the single healthiest, most nutrient-dense part of the grain just so a bag of white flour can sit in a hot warehouse for 12 months without spoiling?
That is the exact trade-off that was made.
Wow.
Yeah. In the context of industrial food processing, getting rid of that fibrous outer shell is the primary objective. It's removed to create ultra-refined white flour, but the cost of that decision is staggering.
Because we lose the vitamins.
They aren't just removing the vitamins and the fats, they are removing the body's biological speed limit for digestion.
The biological speed limit. Okay, how does fiber actually act as a speed limit in our gut?
So normally when you eat an intact whole grain, that outer layer of fiber acts as a physical and chemical barrier in your stomach and intestines.
Okay.
Your digestive enzymes have to work really hard to slowly dismantle that fibrous wall to get to the starchy energy inside.
So it takes time.
Exactly. This process ensures a slow, steady trickle of glucose into your bloodstream over several hours. But when industrial refining strips that fiber away,
The safe is just blown wide open.
completely, the starch inside is exposed and pulverized.
So there's no barrier left at all.
None. The moment that refined white bread hits your digestive tract, your enzymes tear through it instantaneously. The result is a massive, rapid flood of glucose directly into your bloodstream all at once.
Which causes a massive spike in blood sugar. But I want to linger on this for a second because we hear the term blood sugar spike all the time, and it just sounds like a generic bad thing.
Right, it's become a buzzword.
Yeah. So what actually happens in the body during a massive glucose dump? Why is it dangerous?
When your blood fills with glucose that rapidly, your body enters a state of physiological emergency. High blood sugar is literally toxic to your blood vessels.
Oh, wow.
So your pancreas hits the panic button and pumps out a massive surge of the hormone insulin. Insulin acts like a key. It travels to your muscle and fat cells, unlocks them, and shoves the glucose inside to get it out of the bloodstream.
So insulin is kind of the hero in this scenario.
It is at first. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the danger comes from chronic repetition.
Do it over and over.
Exactly. If you are eating stripped, refined carbohydrates for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, your pancreas is constantly flooding your system with insulin to handle these massive glucose spikes.
And the cells get tired of it.
Over time, yes. Your cells essentially get tired of insulin constantly shouting at them. They become deaf to the signal. They just refuse to open the doors.
Which is what we call insulin resistance.
Precisely. The cells resist the insulin, which means the toxic sugar stays stranded in your bloodstream.
That sounds awful.
It is. It forces the pancreas to pump out even more insulin to try and force the doors open. This vicious inflammatory cycle causes severe metabolic wear and tear.
And the article talks about this, right?
Yes. the data we're looking at explicitly links this rapid, repetitive glucose release to the onset of obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and systemic cellular aging.
That is incredibly sobering because it means the actual calorie count of the carb isn't the primary issue. The true villain is the velocity of the digestion.
Exactly. Velocity is everything.
But wait, if velocity is the problem, I feel like traditional dietary advice completely missed the mark for decades. Like, I grew up being told that I just needed to eat complex carbs instead of simple ones and I'd be fine.
And that is a perfect example of how outdated nutritional science can actually do more harm than good.
Seriously?
Yeah. In the past, scientists categorized carbohydrates purely on their rigid chemical structure under a microscope. So simple carbs were molecules like monosaccharides and disaccharides.
Right.
Complex carbs were the long, intricate chains called oligosaccharides and polysaccharides.
Let's translate those terms for a second. So, simple carbs are like single disconnected Lego bricks.
Sure.
Your body can just scoop them up and absorb them instantly. But complex carbs, the polysaccharides, those are supposed to be like giant Lego castles.
I love the Lego analogy.
The assumption was that your body has to spend a ton of time dismantling the castle brick by brick before it can use the energy, right? So complex equals slow and simple equals fast.
That was the assumption, yes.
Yeah.
The scientific community assumed that complex chemical structures automatically took longer to digest, making them inherently healthier.
But the app data says otherwise.
Definitely. As the My-Nutri-Diary data makes incredibly clear, this old, simple versus complex labeling is a biological fallacy. It completely fails to predict how a food is actually going to act in your living, breathing bloodstream.
Because if you take that complex Lego castle, but you run it through an industrial steel roller at a factory and pulverize it into a fine powder,
Yeah.
your body doesn't have to dismantle it anymore. The factory already did the work.
Exactly. The chemical structure might still technically be complex on paper, but biologically, it hits your system like a freight train.
So the old labels are useless.
Essentially, yes. To actually measure this physiological reality, researchers had to abandon the simple complex model and develop a functional metric. That metric is the glycemic index, or GI.
Yes, the GI. The data defines the glycemic index as a scale from 0 to 100 that measures exactly how fast your blood sugar rises in a 2-hour window after eating a food containing 50 grams of digestible carbohydrates.
Right.
And on this scale, 100 represents pure, straight-up glucose.
Spot on. A low GI means the food releases glucose slowly and steadily. A high GI means it slams into your bloodstream.
Okay, got it.
But what is truly empowering is understanding why foods have different GI scores. It's not just about their raw sugar content. There are physical factors that radically alter a food's glycemic index.
And these factors are wild. The first one we just covered, industrial processing. Refined white flour digests faster than coarse, intact grain. But what about ripeness?
Oh, that's a big one.
Because this one always surprises people. Like if you are listening to this right now while drinking a morning smoothie made with a completely overripe dark brown banana, you might want to put it down for a second.
Haha, yeah, you might.
Because the glycemic impact of that fruit has completely changed from when you bought it green.
It really has. As a fruit like a banana sits on your counter and ripens, the complex, resistant starches inside of it are actively breaking down into simpler, faster digesting sugars.
Even though the calories haven't changed.
Exactly. The total calories are identical. But a green banana has a relatively low GI, while a brown spotted banana has a significantly higher one.
That is wild. And the context of the whole meal matters too, right? Like let's say I'm eating a plate of pasta.
Okay.
If I add healthy fats like olive oil or highly acidic foods like tomatoes or vinegar, how does that change the speed limit?
It changes it drastically, and it's because of this fascinating hormonal mechanism.
Ooh, tell me.
When dietary fat or acid hits your stomach, it triggers the release of a hormone called CCK. Think of CCK as a biological brake pedal.
A brake pedal. Okay.
It literally tells your stomach muscles to slow down their contractions, delaying the rate at which food is emptied into your intestines.
So the fat kind of traps the carbs in the stomach for longer.
Exactly. By slowing gastric emptying, the carbohydrates take longer to reach the digestive enzymes in the intestine, which physically delays their absorption into the bloodstream.
So adding olive oil to your pasta doesn't erase the carbs, obviously.
No, the carbs are still there.
But it flattens the curve of the blood sugar spike. It lowers the GI of the entire meal.
Yes, exactly.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. When we combine all these factors, the removal of fiber, the industrial milling, the lack of fat, the data reveals a fact that completely shatters conventional wisdom.
It really does.
When you think of dangerous blood sugar spikes, we all instantly picture a can of soda or a candy bar, right? Pure sugar.
Sure, that's the classic image.
But the glycemic index proved that everyday starches often have a significantly higher GI than actual table sugar.
It is the ultimate hidden culprit. People assume sugar is the peak of the GI scale.
Yeah, I thought so too.
But if you look at the physiological response, sugary drinks and plain sucrose often have a GI hovering in the 60s. Meanwhile, industrially processed starches, your standard white sandwich bread, a fluffy baked potato, or a baguette, they routinely score well over 70.
Wow.
Sometimes pushing into the high 80s or 90s.
Which brings us back to our opening hook. A slice of plain white bread spikes your insulin faster and harder than a spoonful of sugar.
It does.
And the reason this is so dangerous is sheer volume. We might feel guilty about eating a candy bar, so we only have one.
Right.
But we will happily eat toast for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, and pasta for dinner, thinking we're avoiding sugar. We are eating twice as much starch, completely unaware that we are riding a blood sugar roller coaster all day.
It's a systemic, silent driver of metabolic dysfunction.
But wait, as I'm looking at this glycemic index concept, I see a pretty glaring logistical flaw in how it's calculated.
Oh, what's that?
Well, you mentioned that the GI measures the blood sugar response to exactly 50 grams of pure, digestible carbohydrates from a given food, right?
Yes, that's the standard.
But what if I don't eat exactly 50 grams of carbs? What if I'm just eating a tiny cracker or a small handful of berries? I'm not getting 50 grams of carbs unless I eat the entire box.
That's very true.
So isn't the glycemic index kind of useless for understanding real-world portion sizes?
That is an incredibly astute observation, and it is the exact limitation that scientists ran into with the glycemic index.
Okay, so they noticed it too.
Oh, absolutely. The GI tells you the quality of the carbohydrate, the sheer speed at which it digests, but it completely ignores the quantity of the carbohydrate you are actually putting into your mouth during a normal meal.
Right. Think of the glycemic index like the nozzle on a garden hose.
Okay, I like where this is going.
The GI tells you the water pressure. Is it a slow drip or is it spraying out at maximum force? But that nozzle setting doesn't tell you if you're going to flood the yard.
Exactly.
A wide open nozzle, a high GI, doesn't flood the yard if you only run it for 1 single second. To know if you're going to flood your blood sugar, you need to know both the pressure and the total volume of water.
That is the perfect analogy. And it is exactly why researchers had to develop a second, more comprehensive metric.
The glycemic load.
Yes, the glycemic load, or GL. The glycemic load combines the speed of the hose, the GI, with the actual volume of water, which is the amount of digestible carbohydrates present in a standard portion of that food.
So how is the math actually done on that? Is it complicated?
No, it's a straightforward calculation. You take the food's glycemic index and you multiply it by the actual amount of digestible carbohydrates in a standard 100-gram serving.
Okay.
And then divide by 100. The resulting number is the glycemic load. It gives you the full real-world picture of the impact a typical plate of food will have on your insulin response.
And the My-Nutri-Diary text provides a really clear scale for this. For glycemic load, any number up to 10 is considered a low load. That's a safe zone.
Right.
11 to 19 is a medium load. And anything hitting 20 or above is considered a high glycemic load, a high risk for an insulin spike.
And that 20-plus threshold is critical. Comprehensive scientific meta-analyses show that consuming a diet with a consistently low glycemic load directly and significantly correlates with a reduced risk of developing type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease.
Oh, so it's a huge deal.
If you are focused on healthy aging, GL is arguably the most actionable dietary data point you can track.
Well, let's ground this in some real-world data, because the app provides these incredibly detailed tables, and looking at the actual numbers, side by side, is a huge reality check.
It really puts things into perspective.
Let's take that French baguette. The GI is a staggering 95-hour. The nozzle is wide open, almost matching pure glucose,
Yeah.
and its glycemic load per serving is 53. That is miles above the high threshold of 20.
It is essentially a metabolic bomb dropping right into your stomach.
But then you look down the table and compare that to a serving of whole wheat spaghetti, the GI drops all the way down to 37.
A huge drop.
And the glycemic load is only 9. It's safely in the low category. Just by swapping the type of grain and the dense physical structure of the pasta, you have completely changed the biological impact on your pancreas.
It highlights how much control we actually have, provided we have the right data. But it also highlights how incredibly deceptive modern food marketing can be when we lack that data.
Oh, without a doubt. Look at this specific example from the table. Cracker bread.
Oh,
Those dry, airy, crispy little crackers that are constantly marketed to us as the ultimate guilt-free diet food.
people eat them by the sleeve.
They seem so light and harmless, you think you're making a healthy choice.
Yeah.
But their glycemic index is 85, and their glycemic load is 65. That is a higher glycemic load than the French baguette.
And if we look at the mechanics of why, it goes back to our discussion on industrial processing. To manufacture a cracker that dry, that airy, and that shelf-stable, the factory process completely shatters the cellular structure of the starch.
So it's basically pre-digested.
There is zero resistance left. When that cracker hits your saliva, it instantly dissolves into glucose. You think you're eating a diet food to lose weight, but you are actively sending your insulin through the roof, which ironically promotes fat storage.
It's the illusion of health masking a massive sugar spike. But thankfully, the tables also offer fantastic, practical alternatives.
Yes, they do.
If you want a vessel for your sandwich, instead of the baguette or the cracker bread, look at a tortilla wrap. The data shows a GI of 30 and a GL of 16. It's a medium load.
Much better.
The structure of the wrap digests much slower, making it infinitely more manageable for your biological systems.
Which leads to a vital call to action for anyone trying to navigate the grocery store today. You simply cannot rely on standard food databases or basic government nutrition labels to give you this information.
Because they just list total carbs and sugars.
Right, exactly. Standard labels lump all carbohydrates together and completely hide the biological speed limit. They don't tell you the processing method, and they certainly don't list the GI or the GL.
So we're just flying blind.
If you rely on the packaging, yes. If you want to take control of your metabolic health, I strongly encourage you to utilize the specific GI and GL tables provided directly within the My-Nutri-Diary app.
Yeah, having that specific data at your fingertips is really the only way to see through the marketing and make genuinely healthy substitutions.
Totally.
So what does this all mean for us tomorrow morning when we're making breakfast? If we zoom out from all the cellular biology and the numbers, the core takeaway is actually incredibly empowering.
I think so too.
The mission isn't to be terrified of all carbohydrates. Carbs are not universally evil. And going zero carb isn't the only path to health.
Right, it's not about restriction.
The goal is to be strategic about the type of carbs you consume. It's about seeking out whole, unprocessed, high-fiber foods that naturally command a low glycemic index.
Yep.
It's about letting your gut bacteria feast on fermentable fibers. And most importantly, it's about being incredibly vigilant regarding those hidden, highly refined starches that masquerade as healthy staples but spike your blood sugar faster than a handful of candy.
This raises an important question, though, and it's one I want to leave everyone thinking about.
Okay, what is it?
We started this deep dive by discussing how ancient traditional processing methods like stone milling and slow yeast-driven fermentation actually respected our biology.
They did. They unlocked the safe.
Right. They unlocked the nutrients while keeping the speed limit intact. But we traded that ancestral wisdom in for modern industrial refining, specifically to strip out the living fiber just so a product can sit on a shelf for years without spoiling.
The ultimate trade-off for convenience.
Exactly. So next time you are standing in the grocery store aisle, looking at a beautifully packaged bread or cracker with an expiration date 3 years from now, ask yourself a question.
Okay.
If the bacteria, the molds, and the pests won't even eat it because it has been systematically stripped of all its living volatile nutrients, is it really something your own microbiome wants you to put into your body?
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying thought experiment to chew on next time you're packing a lunch.
It definitely changes how you look at the middle aisles of the store.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this custom deep dive into the My-Nutri-Diary data. Keep questioning the labels, keep looking for the real biological data, and remember, just because the locked safe of energy is easier to open now, doesn't mean you want all that fuel exploding into your system at once. Stay curious, protect your pancreas, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.